basic project here. It's for today's course, Surveys and Automations, and this project here is a very basic study, like an example study, I would say, that's tracking blood sugar levels in patients. So we have our first form here that's very basic. We have a participant ID, a first name, last name, an email address. We're asking, is the participant eligible, and do you want to start the surveys, or when are you ready to start the surveys? And we have a question here that will kind of act as like the on switch for the patient, that when we're ready for the patient to start receiving the actual surveys for the study and collecting those blood pressure the blood sugar records, we can just click this little switch and say yes, and then it'll start the surveys flowing to the patient. So this is a very straightforward form, and then for the follow-up forms that we're looking at in the study here, we just have 3 days worth of data that we'll be collecting, and every day we're going to be collecting what was the time of their first meal, and then 2 hours later we want to collect what their blood sugar rating is. So if you imagine this scenario here, we've given the patient a blood sugar monitor, and they're going to hopefully have a meal in the morning, and then 2 hours later they'll give us a reading and put that into their online survey once every day for 3 days. So that's kind of the goal, and using this example here, I want to show that automation process and how we use surveys and how we can automate those surveys to go out to the patient every single day so they can fill out those forms. Right, cool. So when starting off, the first thing we have to do is make our surveys. So right now these are just clinical forms, and these are can only be filled out by someone on the inside of Cedar. So this cannot yet go out to a patient. To allow your surveys to go out to a patient, you have to enable surveys in your project for the first time. So you'll see here on the screen that we don't have any sections for surveys or making survey modifications here on the screen, and we need to enable those. We also don't have a way of enabling surveys here in our data collection. This also just kind of acts as a refresher for our intro level course. I know if you've taken the intro course, we've gone over this once, but this is just kind of a refresher here. But to start up surveys, I'm going to my project setup menu, and I'm going to enable this option here that says, do you want to use surveys in this project? And then I want to click enable on that. Once that's turned on, we'll see that we get a new menu option under the data collection section, and that will also enable our survey options within our designer where we're making our forms. So with that there, I'll click on this enable button, and the page is going to refresh. So now it's enabled, and we just got this new option here under data collection for our survey distribution tools. And once that's been turned on in our designer, we have new options for which forms do you want to enable as a survey, and then survey related options here. And once again, that little toggle switch for the whole project to use surveys is located within the project setup menu on the left hand side. Cool. Now once we're here, and once we have these options turned on, we got these 3 new columns here, or I think just these 2, this one and this one, and we get to pick and choose which forms we want to use as a survey. By default, nothing will be checked. In this case here, you can ignore these last 2. These were just done when I was building this out to test the course here. But typically you'll see them start off with this little enable button here that will let you know, do you want to use this form as a survey? And so I'll click, yes, I do want to use this form as a survey. And it brings you into a few of the settings for that form. So just very basic stuff like how do you, or what kind of title do you want the survey to have? So this is all when the patient has clicked on the link and they've opened up the form and they're going through the form and seeing it. What is the title going to be? What kind of instructions do they get after they click the link? And a bunch of other things here. I'm not going to go over all of these guys. I want to focus mostly on that automation section, so we're just going to go through and check one option that I think is pretty commonly used, which is going to be this one here that allows participants to save and return later to their survey. So this is going to be particularly useful in our case because we expect the participant to fill out the time that they had their first meal, and then it might be a delay between their first meal and 2 hours later when they actually fill out the blood sugar reading. So they can save where they were and save the time they had the meal, and then 2 hours later they can come back and fill out their form form if they wish. And then they can also do both at the same time too if they want. So I'm going to mark that as yes, and I'm going to allow the respondents to return without needing a code, and I'm going to allow them to return and modify complete responses. In case they've made any errors, they can come back and fix their form later on. One other thing that's really important whenever you're sending out surveys is this survey-specific email invitation field. This particular field is going to be really good because you need to specify to REDCap which email address do you want this form to go to. In this particular case, I only have one field called email, but the reason why you have to specify this, and I'll give a quick overview here, is that let's say you have a single form, like this was the base one we were looking at. We just have one field for email, but you might have a field that has what is your emergency contacts email, maybe what is your physician's office email, your primary care physician's email. Do you have email address for other things that you might need to put in there? Maybe it might be a long shot, but I guess maybe insurance company or something might need a contact email. So you might have more than one email on a form. So when sending out follow-up forms, you have to tell REDCap which one of the email addresses do you want me to send this to, in the case that you have more than one. But in this case here, I only have one, so I'm going to select the only one that exists. So anything that goes out is going to go to this, whatever email address is put into this field. All right. A lot of these survey settings are going to be self-descriptive, so they'll tell you exactly what they'll be doing. So I'm not going to go over all these guys here. I want to focus mostly on that automation, so I'm just going to save this on the bottom, and you'll see that that has enabled my form as a survey. So now this is eligible for patients to fill out on their own, and then they could fill it out from home. And the same thing here, I'm going to do it with my readings forms. So they're going to be filling out their blood sugar readings on day 1, day 2, day 3. They are not going to be doing that in the clinic. They will be filling it out on their own from home. So I need to do the same thing here and click enable for my day 1 readings. And the same thing here, it's going to ask you survey titles, survey instructions, how you want the survey to look to the participant, all that good stuff. And I'm just going to scroll to the bottom and hit Save Changes, keeping everything default right now, except what I forgot to do before was this one as well, the survey-specific invitation field, saying that this form is going to go out to whatever email is put into this email box. So that's always a critical piece to fill out, the survey-specific email invitation field. So I'll hit Save there. And I actually want to go through and just double-check that all of these are properly configured too with the survey-specific email. There we are. Email looks good. Okay. And let's do the same thing here. Putting in email. Great. So now that I've specified everything, I want to go through the process of automating these surveys to go through. So I have my first form here, the participant info, and it's got some basic information here as we discussed. So the first name, last name, email. We're asking, is the participant eligible? And I have this question here that's kind of like I was describing before, is going to act as that switch or that start switch for this particular patient. So this is asking, do you want to start surveys to the patient at 9 a.m. the following day? So if I click yes today, because it's 9:14 right now, it's going to wait until tomorrow and then send out the survey tomorrow morning. If I hit yes, that's my ideal goal. That's what I want to happen. So if I'm talking to the patient today, be like, okay, yeah, we're going to start you on this, on this study. Here's your blood sugar monitor. Tomorrow morning, you're going to receive an email, and it's going to be your survey in there. You're going to be able to fill everything out when you're at home. And by using this is going to be the trigger here. So when using a trigger to automate something, I have to work on, or I have to look at the variable that's starting it. So when I made this question here, I have the question and I have the variable name, which says start surveys, and this is going to be what we're going to use to set up that automation. So we're basically going to tell REDCap is that when this question, start surveys, has been chosen as option number 1 or yes, then start the surveys going out. So when start surveys has been selected as yes, then we're going to send those emails out to the patient. So that's what I'm looking for here is the variable name and the choice that is associated with that. Okay, so now that I'm aware of the variable name, okay, it looks like a question has come in. What does the tag @hidden_survey in the survey field do? Oh, okay. Oh, I think that, yeah, that might have been just something I was playing around with earlier. So, oh, actually, yeah, that's a great call here. So this little action tag @hidden_survey is going to hide this question from the patient. So if I send this out to the patient, they fill out their first name, last name, and email, they will not see the question that says, is this participant eligible? And does the patient, and should we start surveys at 9 a.m. the following day? Because that's hidden from the survey view, only clinicians will see these two questions. And that's probably a good thing for the participant ID too. I'll show what that looks like. That's actually a good question right there. So let me show what those do real quick, and then we'll move on to the automation. So when you're filling out this first survey, or let's say you're sending this out to the patient, I can go to my survey distribution tools, and I've been given this item here, which is the public survey link, and the public survey link can just be emailed to anyone at all. So I can copy and paste that into an Outlook email. I can have patients scan it via a QR code if I wanted to generate a QR code like this. And the patients can fill it out. But this is what it will look like to the patient. The patient just sees first name, last name, and email. And I'll just actually submit one of these so we have it here. But you saw there how they did not see the participant ID, is this patient eligible, and should we start the surveys yet? All of those are being hidden because of that tag hidden surveys. Good question. Thanks for noticing. Yeah, no problem. Cool. So now that we have our individual or our first survey set up here with that trigger that says start surveys at 9 a.m., I'm going to use that to automate my follow-up surveys. So I'm going here into the designer, and from the designer, I have these survey-related options on the right-hand side. And from here, I have the Survey Settings button. The Survey Settings button is the menu we saw before, where we were designating, what's the title of the survey, what are the instructions, do you want to allow them to save and return later, what email field should be used to send out these follow-ups. So that page that you saw before is this Survey Settings button. But I'm more interested right now in how to automate these surveys to go out. So I'm going to click on automated invitations for the form that I want to automatically send out. So this first one here, the participant info, there would be no way to really automate the first one because that's our initial contact with the patient. Those can be scheduled, but not necessarily automated based on other criteria. But these follow-ups here, we can automate on certain criteria that will be coming up. So let's say day 1 readings, we want that one to go out at 9 a.m. The day after someone has flipped the switch that we were talking about before that says, do you want to send surveys at 9 a.m.? We want this one to go out at 9 a.m. the next day. So my day 1 readings, I'm going to be clicking on automated invitations. And in this menu here, it's going to give me, I think it's 4 steps on setting up this automation. So step 1 is pretty common, just setting up what the message is actually going to be. Who's it coming from? In this case here, I'll say it's coming from myself. And for the subject, I'll say this is going to be day 1 reading, or blood sugar reading. There we go, day 1 blood sugar reading. And then we have our message here to the participant. Dear participant, please take this survey. Very, very straightforward. Dear participant, this is the first survey for the study you are enrolled in. You can find the link below. Great. And in here, it's going to have some pre-built text that says you may open the survey in your web browser by clicking the link below. And it has this little option in survey. It says survey link in brackets and then survey URL in brackets. One key thing to note is to not remove these guys in the brackets there, because when that email is sent out, this bracket is going to be replaced with the actual link for each patient. So keep that in there. This is just kind of a placeholder telling REDCap, I want you to put the survey link here. You also don't need to keep this text in here. So if I just scrap that and keep the survey link, as long as I have the little piece in brackets, it's still going to work. That's the most critical part. And so I mentioned here, you can find the link below, and then I think it makes sense just to have the link right there, and then some additional instructions, and then, you know, we can sign it. Best, today's going to be Dr. Dice. Yeah. All right. Now step 2. This is the fun part. Step 2 signifies when does the patient become eligible to receive this survey. This is not the timeline. This is not when the survey is going to go out. This is just simply when is the patient eligible to receive the survey. Then from there, in step 3, we're going to determine when do they get sent the survey after they've become eligible. And we can make that, you know, instantly, an hour later, 2 hours later, the next day, that sort of stuff. But right now we're determining who is eligible for this form. And as we talked about before, we have our eligibility for these patients is going to be based off of one thing, and that's going to be this little trigger right here that says, do we want to start sending the surveys to the patient? And that's going to be, you know, make them eligible. All of that is determined by the clinician. The clinician is going to decide when that happens and when the patient becomes eligible. So there's two options in these conditions when the patient becomes eligible. We can either say when they finish a specific survey, which in this case doesn't necessarily make sense because the patient's going to fill out their first name, last name, and email prior to being eligible. So we don't want to say whenever they submit a form. That's not going to be right because there could be a delay between when they submit and when they become eligible. But instead we want to use logic when a patient becomes eligible. So there's a few examples that REDCap shows here as an example, like let's say in this case the patient is eligible when they are older than 30, or the patient is eligible when the sex is equal to 1, which could be female or male. So if the patient has chosen female, and let's say that is the number 1 choice, then the patient becomes eligible for the survey. So we'll use a similar format to this, and this is referring to the variable name that we were looking at before. So the start surveys, that's what that's referring to in brackets. So it's saying what question do you want to check in the brackets. So I can enter this data or enter this formula by clicking in the white box here. When clicking in the white box, it opens up my logic editor. And this is where I can put in my question. So I'm interested when someone clicks that toggle question, and it is, I think it was this one here that called Start Surveys. And you'll see this list popped up here of all the fields in my form as soon as I opened up my first bracket. So as soon as I opened up my first bracket, and then I can start typing in if I want to type it in, and then I can see everything that matches that. It's like, okay, start surveys at 9 a.m. the next day. This looks correct. That's the one that I want to see. And the patient becomes eligible when option number 1 is selected for yes. So when start surveys equals 1, they are eligible. Just like that. Now in this particular case, the quotations are not necessary. I can say start surveys equals 1, but there is never a case where adding in quotations will cause you any harm. So just as practice, I put everything around single quotes just for general good practice. So when start surveys equals 1, that is when the patient becomes eligible. Any questions on that before we continue? Hopefully that makes sense. And you can see this follows a very similar format to what we're working with here. When sex equals 1 or age is greater than 30, it's just checking the condition to make sure that the patient is eligible. So they become eligible when it's 1. So when does start surveys equal 1 as the questions come in? So REDCap is very dynamic on that. And what that is let's say that we're looking at the patient's response here, and we see, okay, this is our test patient, and we say, is the participant eligible? I say yes. And do I want to start surveys at 9 a.m.? And I can choose yes. And as soon as I choose yes and hit save, that tells REDCap that that start surveys equals 1. So the yes here is equivalent to choice number 1 in the designer. So when I created this question here, choice number 1 is yes, and REDCap only really saves that this is that they've chosen number 1 for that answer. It's similar to like an A, B, C, or D on a multiple choice question. Yeah, the clinician needs to choose it exactly. So when start surveys equals 1, the patient becomes eligible. Great. Cool. So once that's done, we then move on to step 3, and this is the timeline of when someone is going to receive the survey after they become eligible for it. So in this case, as soon as someone hits number 1, we want to send the invitation on the next day. So there's a few options. We can send it right away. So the moment they hit number 1 or hit yes to send the survey, they can receive it immediately. But in this case, we don't want that. We want them to receive it at 9 a.m., maybe even 8 a.m., if they're early wakers. I guess, that is pretty normal for, I guess, these days. Yeah. So let's say send it on the next day at 9 a.m. just to stay consistent there. And that means that the patient is going to receive an email the next day after they've chosen yes for start surveys automatically. Then there's another section here that's enabling reminders, so you can choose to remind the patient every hour or so, every couple of minutes, that says, hey, you're due, or just a reminder, please fill this out. So we'll say 9 a.m. It gets sent out, and then let's say they get a reminder every 2 hours to fill out the form until they fill it out. So let's say we send it 3 reminders. So one will go out at 11 a.m., one will go out at 1 a.m., and one will go out at 1 p.m. and then 3 p.m. So we'll send reminders every 2 hours up to 3 times. And if the patient fills it out the first time, then they don't get any more reminders. And the last section here is that is this currently active? So if you're still in development mode and you're still working on your project, you may not want to activate it immediately. But in this case here, I'll just mark it as active so it's ready to go. And I'm going to show this a couple of times just so you get a feel for it. Another question has come in that says, is it advisable to check the box in step 2 that says ensure logic is true before sending invitation? That is a good question. So that's referring to right here. It says ensure logic is still true before sending the invitation. And what that box is good for is that in this case here, there is a delay between when we check yes, the patient is eligible, and yes, they're going to get it at 9 a.m. the next day. So the time between now and 9 a.m. tomorrow, something could change. Let's say the patient called back and says, I changed my mind, I actually don't want to be part of this study. If we say ensure logic is still true, if the physician, gets the call and they're like, it was yes, and now, they get a call at 11 p.m. that says, I can't do it, I'm actually going on vacation, on the next day, I can't do it anymore. The physician can then go in, change it to no, and then before REDCap sends it at 9 a.m. the next day, they'll double check, is this question still a yes? If it's still a yes, it goes out. If it's changed to a no, this box here will cancel that invitation and then make sure it doesn't get sent out. If that is unchecked, and ensure logic is still true before sending an invitation, the moment someone says yes to that question, so in this case, if they say yes, send the survey, it does not matter what that changes to later on, and it'll cancel out the survey, or it will not cancel out the survey even if it's set to no. There are some cases where it's usable, where it's great to have, and there's some cases where it's not great to have. Because in some cases you might still want to send out a survey to people even if data is changed a little bit. Specifically with like dates, if there's like an appointment date or something, sometimes that needs to be sent out no matter what. Like, hey, you've registered for this appointment, and let's say you just want a confirmation to go out to the patient. It's like, I want that confirmation that they've registered to go out no matter what's happened. Even if the date changes or something, they still need a confirmation that they have at least registered once. So it's pick and choose with that, but that's what it does. Hopefully that's a good explanation of it, but yeah, that's a good question. All right, cool. So let's set up a few more of these. Or actually, yeah, let's show it in action first. So we just have one day right now that's automated. We don't have day 2 or day 3 yet, so we'll work on that. But let's work with day 1 right now. Okay, let's see how this looks. So if I'm in my form here, here's my first response from my test patient. Let's say we say they are eligible. I'm going to put in their participant ID. Let's say, yes, the patient is eligible, and yes, I want to start surveys on the next day for this participant. And you'll see here, this is the email the patient has put in, and so because we marked that in the settings, REDCap knows send the follow-up surveys to whatever email address is in this box. So when I save and exit this form, we just have that number 1 in there, and now that information is saved, we get this new data right here that says now there's 4 upcoming scheduled invitations. So REDCap is telling me, hey, by the way, for this patient, for subject number 3, there's 4 things that are coming up for them. And that's going to be, 1 is going to be the actual survey for the day 1 readings, and then 3 of those are going to be those 3 reminders that are coming up. So the 2-hour reminders at 11 o'clock, 1 o'clock, and 3 o'clock. So I can click on this one here, and I'll see that, okay, there's something scheduled to go out tomorrow at 9 a.m., and also at 11 a.m., 1 p.m., and 3 p.m., as reminders, as notified by these little bells here, these little bells next to them. So it does give you those notifications right there. And then you'll see if we go to some of these other patients, like let's say I add another patient in here, we'll open up that survey, and we'll just do another participant. We'll do, we're going to do Honda Civic today. And it's going to be honda@test.com. We'll submit that. All right, but now if I check here under participant number 4, we'll see that there's no notification saying that there's no follow-ups yet. If I go in here and let's say I say that yes, the patient is eligible, but I'm not ready to set them up for the 9 a.m. invitation the following day, I mark that as no. Still no invitation. Let's say the patient's like, yeah, let's do it for next week. I'm going to be coming back on vacation. So next week rolls around. I come back in here. I can then come back and change it and say, okay, yep, they're now ready for it tomorrow. I hit save, and then automatically REDCap will schedule those events or those follow-up surveys to go out. Just like that. All right. So I just want to review this a few more times for the automation process. So let me do it for day 2 and day 3 just to get a little familiarity with it. So day 2, we're going to have another day delay. So I'm going to do automated invitations again. And the same thing here, who the email is coming from. The subject will be day 2 blood sugar reading. And the same message here. Dear participant, please take this survey. Great. So now in this case, we have an interesting, we can do a couple of things here, which is going to be interesting. So we can say, let's see, what would be a good way of doing this? Send the invitation after, okay. Thinking. Okay, after today's date. Okay, I'm thinking that the best way to set up a follow-up, so we don't have the ability to, say, send something 2 days after the trigger at a specific time. So if I want this to go out at 9 a.m. 2 days after the trigger, I don't really have a way of doing that. I can only do it 9 a.m. the day after a trigger, because everything else is either weekday, weekend day, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So I can say send it on the next Sunday, send it on the next Monday. But I don't have the option here of saying send it 2 days later, which is okay. I have this option here that I could say send the invitation 2 days after someone has clicked yes, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's going to go out at 9 a.m. Because I can delay it by 2 days, 0 hours and something, but if the physician clicks yes, the patient is eligible at 9 p.m., that means it's going to go 2 days later at 9 p.m., and we can't really track when the physician is doing that. So this is actually a really interesting situation to see in real time, so we can adjust ourselves, and I'll show you a way that I would think about doing it. In this case here, I actually might use this other option that says the patient will become eligible for the day 2 reading when the following day 1 reading is completed. Ooh, actually this is not good. Right. The reason why that's happening, that we're seeing day 1s multiple times, is that the title I forgot to update. So the day 2 is actually still called day 1 reading. That needs to be day 2. And then day 3, I'm going into the survey settings and adjusting the titles here for these forms. Day 3. Okay, great. That's going to be much better. Going to go back to my automated invitations for my day 2 reading. And I'm going to say day 2 reading, you become eligible for the day 2 reading after you finish the day 1 reading. So this is going to assume that the patient is good with their with the study and they actually finish the day 1 reading on day 1. And then once they finish that, they become eligible for day 2. And then I can send day 2 the next day at 9 o'clock. So they're now becoming reliant upon each other and upon the participant filling this out. So let's say day 2 readings. Okay. And the same thing, I can set up the reminders there. We'll send them every 2 hours and send up to 3 times. And we'll mark this as active. All right, and I'll hit save on that, and that sets up the automated invitation. So you can see it requires a little bit of playing around, a little bit of thinking on it, on what would be the best way to set it up to make sure it goes out at the exact scheduled time that you're interested in. And for the thing here for day 3, I'm going to do the same thing. As soon as someone finishes day 2, we're going to make them eligible for day 3, and it's going to send it out on the next day. So I'll do the same exact thing here. So I'll do day 3, blood sugar readings, and then we'll say, please take this survey. And it's going to be the same thing. They become eligible for day 3 after they finish day 2, and then once they finish day 2, we're going to say this one's going to go out on the next day at 9 o'clock in the morning. Cool. Oh, I forgot the reminders on that one. No big deal. But yeah, so that kind of shows how there's going to be variance between these automations based on when they're supposed to go out. So you could have different things at all different time points. You can have a week worth of 1-day invitations, then you can have a 30-day invitation, then you can have a 60-day, then you can have one that gets sent out if the patient experiences any complications during it. It's like, oh, the patient has marked they've experienced a complication. Send them out a survey immediately asking them about it, something like that. And you can see here on the first survey, we based it off of this clickable trigger, which was the question survey settings. When that's clicked as yes, or choice number 1, then it gets sent out to the patient. And then for our day 2 is then reliant upon day 1 being completed. That says, as soon as when day 1 readings is completed, then they become eligible for day 2, and it's going to be sent on the next day at 9 a.m. And just to kind of show this in action, I'll speed up time a little bit here and see if we can force day 1 survey to be completed for this participant. So I'll open this guy up and just say, let's say the first meal was taken at 9:41, so the reading should be at 11:41, and let's say the blood sugar level was 190, something like that. And I'll hit submit. And now that they've completed day 1, day 2 should be scheduled and ready to go. Let's see here. Day 2 reading is now scheduled. So day 2 is scheduled for tomorrow at 9 a.m. I know the dates don't perfectly line up. We're trying to expedite that there, but yeah, that should do. All right. Cool. Okay. So next up on the list, let's see. We talked about setting up surveys. We talked about automatic surveys on a schedule. We then want to talk about alerts. So we want to talk about how to automate alerts to go to staff based on what's filled out in the survey. So for example here, we just took a blood pressure reading, blood sugar reading, and let's say it's 190. Let's say if it's outside of a specific range, we want to notify our study staff that says, hey, we got an abnormal reading from the patient and we need to follow up with them. So how can we automate a process like that? And we can do that via a similar method like as we saw before. There was a trigger that was when they clicked the yes button, then we can send out a survey. In this case, we can do a very similar trigger that says when this question blood sugar reading is over a certain amount, send out an alert. So let's see how that would work. The first thing I want to check out is the variable name. So as we were looking at in our previous example, that was like start survey, the variable name for this question that's collecting the blood sugar level is called reading 1 for the blood sugar reading. So we want something similar that says when reading 1 is when they input something greater than, let's say, I think it's like 200 or 210, something like that is high. When reading 1 is greater than 200, send out an alert to the study staff. That's what we want to give instructions to REDCap on to do that. That's what we're going to do here. The words, lots of words in the morning. 9:43. All right, we got almost there. So, to set up alerts for our study staff, I'm going to go to the section here that says alerts and notifications on the left-hand side. This is different from the automation we're working with. Before we were doing survey automations, like how to send out surveys. In this case, we're just sending out notices. These are not forms to be filled out, so that's why I'm going to this different section here for alerts and notifications. So I'm going to click on alerts and notifications, and then I have the option to add an alert. So I'll click add new alert. And this is it's a little bit of a different layout, but in principle, it's kind of the same exact thing we set up for the automatic surveys. So the title for this, let's say, high blood sugar reading recorded, something like that. And similar to our previous section, it's going to say, when should this alert be triggered? So I'll kind of do a side-by-side here to give a one-for-one. So right now it's basically asking us step 2 first. What is the condition for sending out this alert? When a specific form is saved, with a specific logic, or when any kind of logic becomes true. So those are the 3 options there. I think in this case what makes most sense is when specific logic is true. So we're just going to go straight based on when someone has a blood sugar reading over a certain level. So we see our similar format here. We had start survey equals 1. I'm going to do a similar thing for our logic here. So I'm just going to click on this open box. It says trigger the alert when the following logic becomes true. And I think it was reading. Yeah, so we have reading 1, and it looks like there's the reading for day 2 and day 3. But I'm just going to stay with reading 1. So when reading 1 is greater than 200, then I want this alert to go out. Very straightforward. Maybe, let's say greater than or equal to 200. And we will save that. And in this case here, once that is done, I don't want to delay that alert from going out. I want it to go out to the study staff or whoever is responsible for the patient immediately. So I'm not choosing send on the next day. I'm not choosing after a certain amount of time. In this case, yes, those alerts should go out immediately, notifying the staff. Then I can do the same thing here of reminder notifications, send out how many times. So we can send out every couple of hours, every couple of days, something like that. But in this case, just once will be fine for me. And the third section here asks what is the actual message going to say. So who's it coming from? Who's it going to? Let's say I'm the study staff and I want to be notified. And then we'll say the same thing as our title up here that says high blood sugar reading recorded. And the message says, there is a high blood sugar reading for a patient. Cool. There is a way to put in a link directly to the patient survey there, and I think we should be able to show that if I have a little bit of time. We'll see. Cool. So here's the high blood sugar reading has been recorded, just to let us know. So let's see if that works. And I'll go back into my responses here. Let's say for patient number 2. We go in, let's say they're having the first meal right now. They came back and let's say they put in a reading of, let's say 150. I should not get an email from this. Hit save, nothing happens. But let's say we had another patient in there. Let me open up my inbox. I hope it doesn't explode. We'll see. And we'll have test Smith. Same email. Oh, right, nothing's going to go out because that was being sent to civic@testhonda.com or something. So let's say this gets sent out, yes, and let's put in a reading over 200. I put my own email in there, so let's say you do this. The reading is over 200. Let's say it's 230. Hopefully that should do it. We'll hit 230. I'll hit save. And now, if I check my inbox, aha, one notification automatically and instantly. There is a high blood sugar reading for the patient. So that's a really useful tool for this kind of project, where if you have this going over for maybe like 50 patients, 60 patients, and you're sending out these readings automatically every day, you only want to get notified of the abstract or abnormal cases, and so you can set up these alerts so you don't have to do any active monitoring of this. REDCap will tell you, hey, something has happened that is outside the range you specified. Check it out. So that's one of the great things of these alerts, and you can set them up for everything. You can set them up as soon as a patient is registered to the study. So maybe you need to notify someone like, hey, someone has signed a consent form. I have to notify someone in some department about that. Or a patient has decided to drop out of the study. Notify someone here. You can set up these triggers or these automatic alerts to go out to anyone's email within CDERS, or even back to the patient directly. You can set up these alerts that says, just, hey, get ready for another survey that's coming up in the next week or something, or hey, we just wanted to check in on you or something. If you have any questions, reach out here. And you can set up the automation to say, send this out every 2 weeks, and you can slightly vary the template to be slightly less boilerplate so it feels authentic, or something like that. So it's a really cool tool. The alerts and notifications are one of my favorites, and you get a lot of good automation out of that. We use that all the time for some of our internal stuff to alert ourselves or others on things that are happening. Actually, this is what is being used when you registered for this course. You automatically got sent a link with sent the WebEx link and a confirmation email using this alert system right here. So whenever you register a course, this is being used. So yeah, it's a really cool tool. Okay, cool, all right. Let's talk about one other thing that's automated, And not sure if you checked it out, but when filling out these surveys, there is this option here of piping. So you'll see here that when we have the time of the first meal of the day, when I fill that in here, you'll see that this question automatically changes to show the exact time that someone should be collecting their blood sugar. So I'm taking this date, the 9:50, and then automatically updating that to 11:50. And there's also something else too that you'll notice, that today's date I didn't have to fill out. Whenever I go to a blank form, it automatically captures today's date. I didn't have to click the Today button. I didn't have to do anything like that. If I click the time of the first meal here, oh, looks like I didn't set it up for the second survey. That's all right. I have it set up for the first one. We'll work with that one. So today's automatically filled out, and this one here gets filled out when we fill out a date. So I just want to show that real quick in our last few minutes here, and then we'll have some time for some questions. So some automation, like this first one here. How do you fill out today's date automatically? That's a great thing to do. Often I recommend filling out the date time whenever someone opens a survey. It's just a great data element to have. Regardless, you may want to figure out later on, hey, everyone's filling out our surveys around 7 o'clock at night for some reason. Interesting thing to have, let's see why that is. But there's this action tag, and action tags kind of add a little extra functionality to each question. And this one here is using @today. @today is automatically filling in today's date to any field that is designated as a date field, so month, day, year. And if you click this action tag button here on the bottom, it will show a list of all the action tags that are available. So the one that I was interested in here was the @today, just like this. There is also one for @now, which will give you the exact date and time instead of just the date. So the date and the time. So depending on what you're collecting, if you just need the date, today is good. If you need the date and time, use the @now. And there's a lot of other of these ones that can be great for automatically populating question answers. So if you have a default choice here, and let's say it asks who is your maybe they have a form that says what state do you live in. Maybe you expect 99% of your participants to be in California. You can automatically select California as the default state selection, and then have everything chosen underneath that. Or you can default anything else that will be like, hey, default this answer to that, default that answer to this. Maybe what country do you live in? Maybe default United States, something like that. So in this action tag section here, we cover action tags more we have an action tag specific course, so I'm not going to go too much in depth here, but this goes over a lot of automatic functionality and describes it pretty well, of the default functionality as well as the today and how to use it. It gives you some examples here. The format must follow the pattern. Default equals something in quotes, and then you put whatever you want as the question marks. So for example, default equals 1, 3, or 6, something like that. Cool. So that's a little bit of functionality. The way we got the automated item here to fill out the reading time is we used another action tag. This was calculating a date, or calculating a date. So we took the date that they put in as the first meal, and we added 2 hours to that answer. So that's another action tag here. And the calc date is also one within this cheat sheet here that gives you a nice long explanation on how that works. So that's a really cool tool to keep in mind as well if you're interested in doing automatic calculations. So yeah, just wanted to highlight a little bit of those. But it looks like we're getting close to our hour mark there. But yeah, it looks like we covered everything I was interested in covering. So we talked about how to set up a survey, how to turn on your surveys. This is a quick recap for the course. So you turn on surveys from the project setup, make sure that you have your surveys enabled. That gives you the survey distribution tool option here, as well as the ability to automate those surveys as you enable them here, the designer. We talked about automating invitations by selecting the automatic invitations, setting up the email, choosing when the patient becomes eligible to receive that email, choosing the time frame after they become eligible to receive the email, how to use logic like triggers or like start survey, how to use things like when a survey is completed to set up these automated invitations. And then we also discussed the alerts and notifications on how to set up notifications for yourself or for your staff when things may be triggered incorrectly. So in our example here, we have a case that when the blood pressure reading was over 200 to send out an email to our own staff. And then we talked about the same thing. When should it be triggered? When should the alert be sent after something was triggered? In this case, we're sending it immediately. And then what email is going to be sent out. Then at the last bit, we just touched on action tags and how to automatically collect certain pieces of data, such as today's date, or how to calculate a time, or to set a default value. You can use that within the action tags. And you can always look for these little red boxes here, with these little colorful boxes on the top, and they give you really nice tips on how to use these different features. I highly recommend these. These are probably my favorite little help guides here, all these little colors. It's fun that they're just using colors now. I like it. A long time ago, REDCap didn't have a single bit of color in it, so I'm glad they're branching out. Let me jump to the questions here while we still have a couple of minutes. Question that says, have you heard of problems with REDCap emails going to patients' spam email? That can occasionally happen. The trick for that is to use the title, or to adjust the title. You might have to play around with it and see how that works, but we've seen a lot of, or not a lot, but we've seen sometimes that Yahoo filters out a lot of REDCap emails, but it depends on how generic it sounds. Like the filters on different email systems like Gmail or Google are very, kind of tailored, like, discount, or, you're overdue, or something like that. It's kind of hard to hit exactly everything to make sure they don't get into spam. It's not a super common problem, but just keep that in mind. Try to make it sound more human than like a spam email or something. Another question that says, can you default to today's date then have other dates as the option? Yes, you can. That is so in this example here, this actually does that, where it says at today for today's date. And uses that action tag at today. And then when that form gets filled out, it will keep today's date as the default, but you still have the option of going in and saying, I want to change it to tomorrow, or something like that, or to the next day. That is a good question.